אדוארד, אני צריכה להקליט גם או אין צורך?
לא, תודה ורדה, ההקלטה רצה, הקלאוד, ועדה. לא.
אדוארד, אפשר הערה קטנה?
בטח.
אנחנו קוראים לגשה קלסנג וואנגמו או גשה או גשלה.
כן. כן. למה טעיתי בה? יכול להיות.
אמרת גשלי.
אוקיי. לא, אוקיי.
זה חמוד, אבל גשלה או גשה?
בסדר. לא גשמה, יש גם גשם.
גשמה גם אפשר, זה לאישה.
אוקיי.
היי קונפל.
אני צריך עוד להשתפר בטיבטית. Good evening, Geshema.
Wait. Good evening.
Good evening, everybody. So, can we start? Is that okay with you?
Sure.
All right. So, good evening for, again, this wonderful meeting every Sunday for learning about the middle way from Chandrakirti through our dedicated teacher, Geshe Wangmo. I will make it short because due to the intemporality of my voice, we'll have it really shortened. So we all remember that we are sitting here and enjoying and learning the teachings through the generosity of our teachers and the workings of the Dharma Friends of Israel. And we can practice the wonderful perfection of generosity by giving dana. The address is on the chat for anyone who wishes, who can support these activities. And now, please.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Edward. All right, let's start as we usually do. So important to set the right kind of motivation to make this teaching most effective. Okay, let me make sure I hear you. Okay. All right, so let's start with some breathing meditation to let go of any disruptive thoughts. Oh.
I'm sorry, Geshe-ma, please, your mic is muted.
Sorry. How long has it been muted? Well, the visualization, I talked about the Buddha in the space in front of you, surrounded by all the great beings, Nagarjuna and so forth. So visualize those in the space in front of you. Visualize that they're inseparable from your Pasana Lama. And then also remember why we're here, why we're studying this text, by way of visualizing first all sentient beings surrounding us. Experiencing endless sufferings and problems. And then let's remember as it says in the scriptures, that all our problems come from the self-centered attitude. While cherishing others is the source of all happiness. And let's now exchange ourselves with everyone else, in that so far we've only been concerned with our own welfare. We felt closest to ourselves. And let's now reverse that. Generate a sense of closeness and concern for all sentient beings, who are just like us. Wanting to be happy and not to suffer. From within this feeling of closeness and affection, generate the wish by all sentient beings, all these endless beings, be free from all suffering and the causes of suffering. And may I be able to bring this about. And that compassion then becomes stronger. so strong that you're determined. I will do whatever I can to protect all sentient beings from suffering and the causes of their suffering. Generating the altruistic special attitude. And that attitude then transforms into the mind of enlightenment, understanding that it can only be most effective benefiting other sentient beings if I become enlightened fast. And so, induced by the wish, by the determination to be of benefit to all sentient beings, we now generate the determination to become enlightened for the welfare of all sentient beings. And it's with this motivation that we also study Chandrakirti's text. And while holding on to the mind of enlightenment, let's strengthen it through the prayers. I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the positive accumulation I gather by listening to the Dharma, may I attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the positive accumulation I gather by listening to the Dharma, may I attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the positive accumulation I gather by listening to the Dharma, may I attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. And again, to strengthen our determination to benefit all sentient beings, let's recite and meditate on the four immeasurables. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. And then we do the 7-limb practice, now directed at the Buddha in the space in front of us, surrounded by all the great masters of the different lineages who are inseparable from your personal Lama. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. And present clouds of every type of offering, actual and mentally transformed. I confess all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time. And rejoice in the virtues of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until cyclic existence ends. And turn the wheel of Dharma for sentient beings. I dedicate all the virtues of myself and others to the great enlightenment. Okay. My apologies for that. Well, for being muted suddenly. I don't know whether how long I talked to myself, but I hope you got the whole meditation. Okay, so let's start then with what you're supposed to do this coming week. And again, most important is to strengthen our compassion for others, our affection for others, and again to go through, well, to familiarize ourselves again and again with the mind of enlightenment. And Rinpoche last week so beautifully in his last piece of advice that was actually part of the question and answer session at the very end, talked so beautifully about practically bringing mind of enlightenment, emptiness into our daily life. And one aspect Rinpoche very much emphasized was, well, when we talk about all sentient beings, when we talk about others, then other sentient beings should not just be some idea of like some abstract of all sentient beings, but it should mainly concern those beings we're actually in touch with in our everyday kind of dealings, our neighbors, our friends, our family, colleagues, people we see and meet in the supermarket, on the road, etc. Those are sentient beings who count. I mean, all these other endless sentient beings, we don't even meet them. So it's easy to think, oh, maybe they will be happy, but we never meet them. And how compassionate we really are, well, that becomes clear in our exchange with in our interaction with other people. So very important for this week, again, in particular when we're with other people, that's when it really counts. And to be, when we're with another person, to make it a habit to just quickly reflect, am I just concerned with my own well-being, my profit, my reputation, being praised, my pleasure and so forth? Or can I totally focus on that person? In that moment, when you're in that with that person, to make an extra effort whenever you interact with other people on a personal level, to make that person the center of your universe. We feel we are the center of the universe. Most of the time, we're wrapped up in ourselves to such a degree. It's all about us at all times. It's just that's how we got used to it, to do it this way. And it's just a matter of habit. We're so habituated to act in a certain way, but the easy things about habituation is that it can be broken. It can be undone. We can break through these habits and develop new habits. Now, this is the challenge for this week when we say equalize and exchange ourselves with others, as we briefly did as part of the introductory kind of meditation or the setting the right kind of motivation. We're focused on just me at all times. So there's this self-centeredness in the sense of just thinking mainly of ourselves, as if everything was just revolving around me. Now we should exchange ourselves in that this focus on just me, everything revolves around me. We just change that in that when we're with this other person, it all revolves around the other person. Put this other person in the center, at least in that moment when we're with them, just to make that a habit. Now, this is my center, this person's well-being, that's my main concern. And then, of course, to be skillful, when it's appropriate to be serious, you're serious. When it's appropriate to smile, you smile, to whichever degree you can. It doesn't mean you have to just let them do whatever they want, and you can't be rough when it's required. That's not what it means, but that's just their welfare. That's in the center. That's the center of your attention. And for that, it's also important to put yourself into that person's shoes to whichever degree you can. Of course, we can never really know exactly how this person is feeling, but if our focus is already kind of tune into them, we have a sense, put all our attention onto this person and not on your own self, then you learn to be more empathetic. You kind of put yourself into this other person's shoes to such a degree that you automatically say things that are appropriate. It's kind of like you tune in with that other person and you listen to them. Listening, so important. Not just needing to talk, but needing to listen. What is this person telling me, etc. So this is your special homework, if you like, or task for this week, to really make a point whenever you meet people to put this person in the center. So instead of being self-centered, you're other-centered. Okay, that's not easy because we're used to do it the other way around. In fact, when we're with other people, we feel even more protective of ourselves. So it's much harder to focus on others when we actually are with others. It's so much easier on the meditation cushion, and especially with people we have a hard time with. So this is not easy. You won't be able to perfect this in 1 week. I mean, it takes lifetimes to do it, but we need to start somewhere. So if you haven't done it already, well, this is your main focus for this week. You start in the morning, possibly go through the notions in your meditation. Imagine this, visualize the situation with this person, that person, especially when you have a hard time doing it with this person. Then that should be your focus. But of course, if you find it's overwhelming, you may choose someone with whom it is easier. But to really prepare in the morning, after you set your motivation, to kind of go through the notion of, well, put this person in the center, the way you usually put yourself in the center. Now this other person is in the center. And then accordingly, see if you can really do this in that moment, be focused just on the welfare of that person and put yourself into his or her shoes. After a while, it just starts to flow and you probably be able to say the right things and, kind of tune in and listen well, etc. So that's your practice. And of course, don't forget, if you can, to also think, may this person be happy. May one day I'll be able to lead them to enlightenment. All right, that's for this week. It's a lot to ask, but see how it goes. All right, great. Now that's with regard to the method. Now let's go back to the text. Chandrakirti's text. Now we're still dealing with the Chittamatra school in order to prepare our mind, to make our mind more flexible by way of these ideas. What verse did we get to? What verse did us talk of last time? Can anyone remind me? 45? Did I hear right? 45? Did someone just say 45?
Yes, I did.
Yes, thank you. All right, 45 is then. All right. So just briefly, to say 43, 44, as you've heard before, let me say, this is just a provisional teaching. It's just an interpretative teaching, talking in particular of this specific type of mind as a foundation consciousness, something that Chandrakirti also talks about in his self-commentary on this particular verse. He says that, well, it's almost like replacing the idea of God with this foundational consciousness, in the sense that, well, in India, even at the time when Chandrakirti taught this text, when he wrote these verses in order to explain Nagarjuna's text, well, there were a lot of systems, philosophical systems, that accepted, of course, a creator God, even at the time of the Buddha, of course, when the Buddha also taught this type of consciousness. And so one purpose of teaching is, I guess it's kind of similar to this idea of something that's always there, from which everything arises. Well, that's God in some systems and some religious systems. Well, in the Chittamatra school, it's consciousness. Everything arises from consciousness. It's always there. All our experiences come from this. But it's more than that. It's not just that it replaces a creator God as such. It's ever present. And it conveys the idea of, well, karma, of course. Okay, how do you account for karma? Well, all these imprints left from moment to moment. Every thought we think, it leaves something behind. Everything we perceive, everything we hear, we see, it always leaves something behind, and then accounts for future experiences due to the ripening of these imprints that were left on this foundational consciousness. And it also explains how we take birth from one life to the next. Well, pretty easy. All the other minds disappear, as in like the sense consciousnesses at the moment of death, just before our mind leaves this body. Okay, so what leaves the body? The coarse minds, they first disappear. They're no longer active. So the only thing, according to this school here that we're dealing with, the mind-only school that asserts this type of foundational consciousness, that the only thing you're left with at death is this foundational consciousness. That carries on to the next life. And it's also the I, it's the self. That is the self that exists according to the Chittamatra school. So the Chittamatra school, they deny a kind of controlling I and a separate, solid, controlling I. They don't deny inherent existence, but the sense that there's a controller. There's this I that exists separate from mind and body that controls all my action. This sense of an I, they deny, but they don't leave us stranded. There's nothing there. No, they say this foundational consciousness, the mind that is always there in the same form, as in like it's the storehouse for all our imprints. It even continues when we die. It's very reliable in that sense. It's also the I, it's the essence of who we are. So we can explain karma based on that. We can explain rebirth. We can explain the I that does exist after having denied a self-sufficient, substantial I, which they deny in this particular school. We can also account for Buddha nature, something that goes on, because that type of mind will at some point become the enlightened mind of the Buddha. So everything is taken care of, if you like. But this type of mind, everything can be explained, which is initially a little hard to explain if we only take the Madhyamika system. That's difficult. The idea of mind, that it doesn't exist inherently, that imprints are just left because the action is over, and that continuation, as in like the cessation that continues on, that's really what we talk about as the imprints. That's difficult. Initially, it's just hazy and not concrete enough. Now, you may notice that except for the Prasangika school, every school leaves us with something concrete, some concreteness. Well, God is replaced, of course. God is very concrete in a lot of systems. The huge presence accounts for everything. As long as we do the right kind of things, God will grant us this, that, and the other. So something, it's always been there, will continue to be there, and is responsible for everything. And then in the Vaibhashika and the Sautrantika school, well, you have this external world, for instance, which exists exactly. You have partless particles. It's there. It's a constant. There's a constant building block. There's, of course, well, one of the aggregates is seen as the self. Well, they talk definitely about these building blocks that are partless, and that to some degree there's also an unchangeability of those. Now, there's always something stable there, something to hold on to. Chittamatra, the mind basis of all inherent existence, they all accept. Now, there's enough concreteness that we don't feel like, oh, I'm losing it all. So it's really the Prasangika school that takes away any concreteness. There's nothing really left, and that's scary. And some people may just turn away from the Dharma, which is why the Buddha temporarily gave these teachings. Okay, so foundation consciousness, persons exist. There is some inherent person, then the aggregates alone exist. So these teachings were given for those who cannot understand the most profound truth. And there are other examples, as in verse 44, an analogy for this is given when the Buddha himself seems to be talking about inherent existence when he talks about, well, first of all, teaching about I and mine, the way the Buddha sometimes actually talked about an inherent I, etc., depending on the person the Buddha was talking to. But also, just sometimes the language seemed to suggest there is an I, there's mine, there's something very concrete there. Just the word, just the way the language is used. And of course, that was only done to lead people in the right direction, setting forth conventional truth, possibly seeming to suggest that there's inherent existence, and sometimes explicitly suggesting there's inherent existence, only to then deny it later on. Okay, now, having said all that, now the question is, what is, first of all, the idea of the Chittamatra school, besides the idea of a foundation consciousness, and how can it be denied? All right. Now, if you've heard me say last time, it's so helpful. I've already given you just a few minutes ago, I talked about why it is important to understand this foundation consciousness, how that can be very helpful temporarily, just to get used to certain ideas, but also the idea that there is no external world. That is so helpful, especially in the 21st century when materialism is so central in our lives, when the external world, external objects are so important, are seen so important, and the mind is, well, seems to be of lesser importance. I mean, material possessions, etc., as His Holiness says, physical hygiene, physical health is so important. Mental health doesn't get the same kind of attention. Then, in particular, I believe it's very helpful to think along these lines of the Chittamatra school. And the explanation here is given if you read verse 45. So what is the view of the Chittamatra? First of all, apprehending no objects, he perceives no subject, and understanding the triple world to be mere consciousness. Now, here what this is saying actually is talking about a bodhisattva who's on the 6th level. They understand reality, who's on the 6th bhumi. Of course, the chapter we're studying is the 6th chapter, which particularly deals with the parameter of wisdom. Likewise, it talks about the 6th bhumi of a bodhisattva who mainly practices, who focuses particularly on the parameter of wisdom. And now, in answer to the question, well, what does the Chittamatra actually assert besides the idea of a foundation consciousness, which of course we've heard not all Chittamatras accept that, but some do. What else do they assert? All right, well, they assert that a bodhisattva on the 6th level, after they've realized emptiness directly, they realize exactly that there is no external phenomena, that there is just apprehension of objects. But if the mind wasn't apprehending an object, there wouldn't be any subject either. And this object and the perceiving mind, they're inseparable in that actually the fact we perceive something, it's only due to the ripening of imprints on the mind. I previously briefly mentioned it. Every time we perceive something, it leaves an imprint. And then that imprint again accounts for future perception of something. So the Chittamatra school says there are these external objects actually don't exist. It seems there's this whole world outside of my mind, but that is just a mistaken appearance. In actuality, we're all dreaming. We're just dreaming. Well, I guess as humans, we're dreaming a similar dream. And in that way, the advantages of this assertion are that, well, there's a lot more focus on the mind. if everything is just an appearance to my mind, there are no external objects, well, then if I'm so busy with the external objects, trying to fix them all the time, trying to adjust them, trying to change things around me, but if I then realize, well, there isn't really that much to be changed outside of my mind, how can I change things? By transforming my mind, by changing my mind. That's already moving our mind, moving us in a very different direction, putting more attention on our inner world, understanding that, of course, my perception of objects is very much dependent on my mind. So in the Prasangika school, that's great. That's a great way to go about things, to understand that the objects I perceive are very much dependent on my mind. The Prasangika never denies that. And you can see how, although the Chittamatra school that we're temporarily studying is refuted, eventually we refute it, but to just think along the lines of the Chittamatra school is helpful because it puts all our attention onto the mind and less onto the external objects, especially living in the materialistic world the way we do. All right. Now, what's also important, of course, is therefore when they talk about the ultimate nature of all phenomena, well, that's the lack of external existence of the objects that appear to our sense consciousnesses. And one way of putting it is saying, well, the lack of external phenomena, that's emptiness. Another way of saying it is the lack of subject and object existing in a dual fashion, existing in a separate fashion. In that mind and its object, they're inseparable. That's just another way of saying phenomena don't exist externally. They arise just from an imprint. There's the object, that's one part of the mind, if you like, and then there's the mind perceiving that object. You can't separate them. That's the ultimate nature of phenomena. Okay, that's the way they describe emptiness. It seems harder to understand when we hear about this, other than, well, it was so easy with the, so straightforward with the Prasangika school, lack of inherent existence, and that's it. Here, explaining it becomes more complicated, but it's actually said it's not as deep when you actually understand it in terms of, well, in terms of you not going into such a deep level. And of course, actually what the Chittamatra school explains, in the end, of course, there are external phenomena. So it's not even that you can actually realize the lack of external phenomena. You can't do that. But anyway, even if the lack of external phenomena were to exist hypothetically, it's not as deep as, well, when you deny actually the lack of inherent existence. But besides the fact, besides that, well, phenomena do not exist externally, but it still do exist externally. There is an external world, and the Chittamatra school is only a temporary kind of provisional view. But as I said, it's very helpful for our mental development to think along those lines. But although it's very helpful, another example that I gave last time, if you get really angry with another person, with an external situation, and you realize it's just part of your own mind, well, that's helpful in terms of not being angry with an external situation, with the way your neighbor's garden looks, for instance, because it's just appearing to your mind. Also, attachment towards the body of another person, attachment towards, I don't know, certain external objects. Again, they get lessened if you really think along those lines. If you kind of become more familiar with this idea, then this sense there's really something out there to hold on to, that is lessened. And again, very helpful. But there are a lot of problems, of course, with this school. There are a lot of difficulties, and someone also mentioned them in a question that was asked with regard to the Chittamatra school. One question is, well, when we say, I use this phrase, it's like we're all dreaming, but a similar dream. Well, if the mind-only school, there's this danger of like, well, how do we actually communicate? I mean, if you talk about communication, it no longer makes any sense, because communication, the way it is ordinarily explained is we talk to each other. Our facial expressions, they communicate something. Our words, of course, do. Possibly smells as well. They communicate something. There are many different ways in which we communicate, but if there are no external phenomena, well, that falls away. There's no communication. So how can I actually communicate with another person if there's no sound coming from my body, because there's no external body? Therefore, there's no sound I can create. My facial expressions, well, which facial expressions if there's no face? What smell if there's no body to have a certain smell that the other person picks up, and so forth. So here it's, first of all, when I perceive myself talking, it becomes really complicated. So if I hear myself talk, of course I hear my own voice, and I guess I perceive my own smell, though I'm not aware it's a different smell. I'm not aware, but I do smell it. And okay, my facial expressions, I don't see them from the outside, but I'm aware of this muscle movement to a certain degree. So what's happening? Just imprints ripening. They're not externally happening. It becomes really complicated. So all these imprints ripening. And then Leora, who I just happen to see on the big screen right now, nice exchange for not seeing myself. I see Leora with a palm tree and stuff at the beach. So Leora, at the same time, she sees my facial expressions. If she's right in front of me, she can smell my bodily smell, and she can see the expressions, hear my voice, etc. So all that because of the ripening of her imprints. So we just happen to have similar imprints. Of course, what I perceiving myself, is different to what she perceives, and vice versa. So both ways, if she talks, I perceive something different from what she perceives, and the other way around. But still, there is some common ground. But the person asking the question is saying, well, how do you know? How can you account for that? In fact, the person is going as far as saying, well, doesn't that lead to the danger of believing in solipsism, or solipsism, whichever way you want to pronounce it. So isn't there that danger of the idea of solipsism, which is, I've got it right here, the definition of it, and that's definitely something when you study the Chittamatra school, it leads to that kind of extreme idea, or you can fall into that extreme idea, which is a mistaken or an extreme view that is denied. But I'll just read you what it says here. It's the philosophical idea that only one's own mind is there. Solipsism, as in like solid, like alone, soulless, alone, and that only my own mind exists and nothing else exists. So there's only me, and I have this idea that there are other people because there's this ripening of imprints, although there's no external other person's body, there's no external sound of a voice, etc. But because I wrongly perceive there to be this external world, I assume that there are other minds while they're not. That would be an extreme that the Chittamatra doesn't accept. They do accept there's no external world, but they say there's Leora's mind, and there's my mind, and there's everyone else's mind. And we just happen at the same time, or basically exactly the same time is to be seen. But there's a certain time when I say something and maybe Leora doesn't notice it right away, so there may be some time gap. I start talking and a second later then Leora notices it, but it's only due to the ripening of imprints. So therefore the idea of solipsism doesn't hold. There is her mind, there is also my mind, but how do you prove that? Very difficult to prove the existence of another mind other than myself. Of course, even in the Prasangika school, you could argue, well, I know my own mind, but I don't know another person's mind. So for all I know, they could all be zombies, all right? But of course, it's easier in the Prasangika school to say, well, there are other people as well. I can talk to them, I can see them, I can smell them. And of course, according to the Prasangika school, of course there are other sentient beings. Wouldn't make sense. Enlightenment wouldn't make sense. A Buddha couldn't exist. Of course there are other sentient beings. But as I said, in the Chittamatra school, that becomes much harder to prove. Very hard to prove. Okay. And of course, the Chittamatra school as well, I mean, on top of that, they say there are sounds, there are smells, but just not externally existent. There are only those sounds and smells that appear to my own mind. And yeah, this is not the final school, and there are contradictions within that school. What you mentioned, the person who asked this question, so solipsism is one problem, of course, but there are other problems as well. What is another problem? How do you account for cause and effect? For instance, if I make a fire, or I walk past the road and I see a fire, according to the Chittamatra school, how do I account for the cause of that fire? All right. Well, firewood, you need it, for instance, if it's a wood fire, you needed firewood, and someone need to lit the fire, or at least you have lightning or what have you, something that caused this fire. But if it's just an appearance to my mind, it doesn't need to be preceded by these causes other than an imprint. So in the philosophical schools, other than the Chittamatra school, there's a lot of emphasis, and even in the Chittamatra school, the emphasis is there. If you have a result, it must be preceded by its cause. Okay? So if you have a sprout, there must have been a seed before that gave rise to the sprout. So certain results can only arise if a certain cause preceded them. But according to the Chittamatra school, well, if I see a sprout because of the ripening of my imprint, and I don't see the seed, does that mean this sprout was not preceded by a seed? Because I didn't have the ripening of that imprint. So actually it didn't arise. I only had the ripening. And if no one else saw a seed, I cannot account for the fact that a certain result, such as a seed, a sprout, must be preceded by a seed. Because why? No one had the ripening of an imprint of that. No one saw it. Now, that's really difficult and really complicated. And we already, with these questions, we can see it's very difficult to uphold. It's very difficult to uphold. But as I said, we learn so much from that idea. And some of the ideas that are put forth in the Chittamatra school, they're actually not denied. Okay, I said that before. I quoted one of my teachers who once said, when we studied the Chittamatra school, he said, I don't know whether he said it with these words, but that's how I remember it. He said, we will never deny as much once we come to the Prasangika school. We never deny of the Chittamatra school as much as you may expect. We actually maintain a lot of ideas such that, of course, there's a conventional external world, but still, my experiences are very different from yours. Okay, so it is still the subjectivity set forth, well, similar to the Chittamatra school, that is due to the ripening of imprints that I see something. In the Prasangika school, they say, well, yeah, there is an external world, but still our experiences are very much dependent on our mind. They're very subjective, and every experience is totally unique. No person can have exactly the same experience. Never. Impossible. Person talking about ordinary human being, I mean, ordinary sentient beings. Of course, we're not talking about Buddhas, but here, sentient beings, if I perceive something, depending on where I stand right now, on my physical, of course, structure, etc., and very important, my imprints, my mind, my cultural background, my upbringing, all this plays into the unique way I perceive something. And that's very similar to the Chittamatra school, very similar, except they say there's no external world. All right. Okay, now going back to the text, if we can see the text again, I just wanted to bring up this question by this person. Yes, there is this danger of solipsism. Solipsism, this idea there's only my own mind, but of course that's denied. So apprehending no objects, Bodhisattva on the sixth ground perceives no subject that is separate from an object, and understanding the triple world, the world of the desire realm, the formless realms, just the world, cyclic existence as we know it, to be mere consciousness. It only arises in the nature, it's just in the nature of mind. Not saying it is consciousness. The external world is not consciousness, but it's not separate. It cannot be separated from consciousness. The Bodhisattva who abides in the perfection of wisdom, all right, who practices mainly the perfection of wisdom on the sixth ground, realizes suchness in terms of consciousness only. So the lack of external existence, that's the ultimate nature of all phenomena. The inseparability, being unable to separate the object from the mind, since the object is only an appearance to the mind. There's no actual external objects. There are sounds, there are smells, but they don't exist external to our own mind, just appearances. And how does that work? It says then in the next verse, verse 46, just as in the ocean, whipped by windstorm, waves rise high one after the other, or one after another, so from the seat of all, foundation consciousness, mere consciousness arises through its own potential. Giving an example here, Chandrakirti gives the example. How does it work? According to the Chittamatra school, especially the Chittamatra school that believes, the one following scripture, that's usually the description of the type of Chittamatra school that believes in this type of foundation consciousness. Well, just as, for instance, an ocean, you have waves rising in an ocean. Those waves cannot be separated from the ocean. When if you're the beach in Tel Aviv, and there are sometimes stronger waves depending on the weather, sometimes very gentle waves, but still these waves are part of the ocean. They rise from within the ocean and they go back into the ocean. What are they whipped up by? I mean, how do they come about? It's the wind. It's the wind, or other conditions as well, but let's take just the wind. So it's the wind that whips up these, that moves the ocean to such a degree that we talk about waves. And sometimes they're higher and less high, etc. So likewise here, the objects of the mind are like the waves. They're part of the mind. They cannot be separated from the mind. And it's due to seeds that are part of the foundation consciousness, or the basis of which is the foundation consciousness. It's due to those that these objects arise as part of the mind, just as the waves are part of the ocean. All right. Oh, no, I shouldn't say ocean. You have only a sea. In Tel Aviv, it's the sea, it's not the ocean, but you know what I mean. All right. So from the seat of all, foundation consciousness, mere consciousness arises through its own potential. So here, potential in the sense, these seeds that were left. And then it goes on to say, okay, so let's summarize the first two verses just quickly. Okay, so when you perceive emptiness, when you perceive, like a bodhisattva on the sixth level perceiving emptiness, what do they perceive? Well, the fact that objects and mind cannot be separated, there's no external world. They perceive emptiness according to the Chittamatra school, which is, like I said, the lack of mind and its object existing as separate entities, or putting it in a different way, the lack of external phenomena. And how do then phenomena arise? If that's the case, that's how phenomena exist. Well, the example of the ocean and the waves is given. And then verse 47, sorry. Therefore, dependent nature, which is the cause of imputed things, has intrinsic existence. Now, this adds another complication, if you like, but it's not that difficult, yet important to understand in order to understand the Chittamatra school. Because something that is also unique to the Chittamatra school is a way in which they categorize phenomena which is very helpful. Helpful also in terms of the understanding of the Prasangika school. And it's not that strange to us. They actually, as you're familiar with, usually the division of phenomena is into permanent and impermanent. We're all familiar with that. Now the Chitta Mantra, they also have that division, permanent, impermanent, but they subdivide permanent phenomena further. So instead of just saying they're impermanent phenomena and they're permanent phenomena, they also talk about permanent phenomena that is emptiness and permanent phenomena that are not emptiness. So a permanent phenomenon that is emptiness and permanent phenomena that are not emptiness. Okay, so emptiness is a permanent phenomenon, but they describe that separately as a thoroughly established phenomenon. Emptiness is explained separately, and emptiness, as I explained, is the lack of external phenomena, not the lack of inherent existence, but the lack of external phenomena, and that is a permanent phenomena that is explained separately from other permanent phenomena. Okay, fair enough. So there's basically a thoroughly established phenomenon means emptiness. Then there's the imputed phenomenon that refers to, well, permanent phenomena, but it can also, well, if you don't just talk about that which exists, you can also talk about imputed phenomena, including also non-existences. But then the category is even wider. You're not just talking about that which exists, but if you also want to include that which does not exist, you also say that non-existences are imputed phenomena. So imputed phenomena include all permanent phenomena other than emptiness. They're imputed phenomena, plus everything that doesn't exist. If you want to include those, they're all imputed phenomena. And everything else that is neither emptiness, nor non-existent, nor permanent, well, that's impermanent phenomena. They're called dependent phenomena, dependent on causes and conditions. So they talk about these three categories: dependent phenomena, those that are impermanent and therefore dependent on causes and conditions; imputed phenomena, that everything that is permanent, either non-existent, if you include non-existences, they're also called imputed phenomena. Then they talk about permanent phenomena other than emptiness. They're also imputed phenomena. That's the second category. And thoroughly established phenomena, those are emptiness. Thoroughly established, well, emptiness is thoroughly established, is the ultimate nature of all phenomena. It's easy why they call it thoroughly established in that sense. So just to kind of put it in a simple way. Dependent phenomena, impermanent things are dependent on causes and conditions. That's why they call them dependent phenomena. Imputed phenomena, that's a little weird, because imputed, when we hear the word imputed, we think of the Prasangika school. Everything is merely imputed. Well, they don't see it in that way. They rather say that impermanent phenomena we perceive with our sense consciousnesses, right? They're impermanent. They're very easily perceived. Sounds, smells, etc. Although the Chittamatra school says they don't exist externally, but they still exist. There's still sounds and there's still sights. They even talk about an eye consciousness. Of course, eye consciousness is not dependent on an actual eye. No. And there's no external form. But they still talk of eye consciousness as a mind that is mistaken with regard to external phenomena. It doesn't need eyes, etc. But it perceives only sights, and it gives us only visual objects. And even the Chittamatra school talks about the eye consciousness, except they say it's just like an eye consciousness in a dream. There's no external object, of course. And likewise for the other sense consciousnesses, there is an ear consciousness and a nose consciousness and we believe we eat. Actually, we're not eating. It's only imprints ripening. We're not actually eating. Very good against the attachment for food. There's no external food, right? There's no external stomach. If we really become familiar with that, oh, it's just sensations. We're not actually, there's no delicious food. It's just an imprint ripening. and so forth. All right, but they do talk about these different types of consciousness. And therefore, according to the Chittamatra school, what was I saying just now? I lost it. Can someone remind me what I was talking about just previously? Impermanent phenomena. So there are these impermanent phenomena. No, imputed. Now I remember. Imputed phenomena. So these sights and sounds, visual objects, and so forth, they're impermanent phenomena. And imputed phenomena means permanent phenomena other than emptiness. They are imputed. Why? Because you can only perceive them with a conceptual mind. Okay, so for instance, the absence of monkey in the space in front of you. It's just a negation of something that is permanent. You need a conceptual mind. You need a conceptual mind to perceive that. Something that doesn't exist, right? You basically need a conceptual mind to kind of believe it to be existent. So like, oh, it exists, it's like this, it's like that. It can appear, non-existences can appear to the sense consciousnesses, but to really think about it and to determine this is existent or not, well, that's the conceptual mind. Now, therefore, they're called imputed phenomena. That's something that doesn't exist, something permanent. You need a conceptual mind. They're too abstract. They're more abstract than impermanent things, and therefore you need a conceptual mind, and they're imputed therefore by a conceptual mind. It's a little bit complicated. If you don't have a background in philosophy, this may be a little bit complicated, but it's not most important. Here, well, this verse, the verse we're dealing with right now, 47, is talking about, it's saying, okay, given on the basis of these three categories, emptiness, thoroughly established phenomena, impermanent phenomena, that is imputed phenomena, and then everything else, okay, permanent phenomena that are not emptiness, plus non-existences, that is described as imputed phenomena. Of those, let's look at impermanent phenomena. So do they exist externally? No, they don't. There's no external phenomena, but they are still, dependent natures. So these dependent phenomena, or dependent natures as they also describe, which is the cause of imputed things. Now, cause in the sense that imputed things are only possible if there's something impermanent. I mean, even if it doesn't exist, an imputed something, an imputed nature, an imputed entity, such as like horns of a rabbit, something that doesn't exist, or flying cows. Well, to perceive it, you need something there. You need to, well, at least have a mind that is impermanent. The example that's given in the text, well, you need at least a sky, for instance, which you perceive a flying cow, not an external sky, but like I said, in the Chittamatra school, they still talk about sights, sounds, etc., except they don't exist externally. Now, in the text, they say, like, if you perceive a rope to look like a snake, if you mistakenly perceive a snake, there is no snake. Well, you still need a ground. You still need the floor or the earth, a ground based on which you can have that appearance. So you always need something impermanent. You always need something impermanent there. So impermanent phenomena, they are the cause of everything that is imputed. Imputed according to the Chittamatra school, conceptual mind, perceiving abstracts, perceiving permanent aspects, perceiving non-existences, and so forth. So imputed phenomena, they exist intrinsically. They exist. They have they're more real. I mean, they're very real in that sense, more real than other things. Except they don't exist externally, but definitely the mind, for instance, very real, has intrinsic existence, and these imputed phenomena, they emerge in the absence of external objects. They exist, although there's no external objects. It actually exists. It exists truly. and it's beyond the realm of concepts. So it exists beyond the realm of concepts. As I said, what exists within the realm of just concepts are these abstract things or non-existences. All right, like something permanent. Likewise, non-existences. You need a conceptual mind to really to think about them, etc. In the Prasangika school, they would actually say the same thing. You need a conceptual mind. But this is something, and you will not understand this right away, but if you study all the different tenets, except for the Prasangika school, the Madhyamika school, really, but Prasangika, yeah, so this is slightly different, but they all talk about kind of like, they seem to suggest permanent phenomena, impermanent phenomena, just a little bit more real than permanent phenomena. There's something about these impermanent phenomena, they're more tangible. Of course, in the Chittamatra school, that no longer, sorry, in the Prasangika school, everything is merely imputed by the mind. So it takes on, it's very different. Like the meaning of imputed is different. It's like whether something is impermanent or not, they're equally lacking inherent existence. So there's a distinction. In the Chittamatra school, by Bhashika, Santantrika, very pronounced so. Imputed phenomena, sorry, impermanent phenomena. So whether you call them impermanent phenomena or dependent natures, as the Chittamatra school does, according to them, they're just a little bit more real, more solid, but and they're also the basis for everything that is permanent. Okay, they're the basis for everything that is permanent. That last aspect being the basis for everything that is permanent, also the Chittamatra school, sorry, the Prasangika school would assert, but they would assert that permanent and impermanent is mutually dependent. All right. Okay, I hope I don't confuse you further. This 47 includes so much information. But the bits that you didn't understand, well, never mind for now. You don't need to know all these details for understanding the Chittamatra school. Understanding that which you need to understand here. Just to repeat what it says in 47, of the three categories, dependent phenomena, in other words, impermanent phenomena, then thoroughly established phenomena or thoroughly established natures, which means emptiness, and everything else, imputed natures. Well, here, dependent, that is impermanent phenomena, they are the basis for everything else. They're the basis, they're the cause of imputed things, for instance, of course, also the basis for emptiness. And these dependent natures, they emerge in the absence of external objects. You don't need external objects. They actually exist. They exist truly. And it's beyond the realm of concepts. So beyond words, beyond concepts, they do exist. All right. Okay. Having said that, then the next question that arises is in verse 48. This was just setting forth, okay, just these verses 45, 46, and 47. What do they present? They present the Chittamatra system. Okay, no external phenomena. Mind and objects are inseparably linked. All the objects arise from within the mind. And they do rise, and that's not mentioned here explicitly, but it's because of imprints. Okay, that every time you have a thought, you perceive something with the eye consciousness, that leaves something in the mind called imprint. Okay, leave something in the mind, leave it on the foundation consciousness. Something is left with every thought, with every perception. An imprint is left with the foundation consciousness. And when the conditions are ripe, that imprint again ripens and gives rise to an object and to the mind that to which the object appears, all right, or to a mind that perceives that object by way of appearing to that mind. So one single imprint gives rise to the object and to the mind, and in turn it leaves another imprint for a new perception in the future. Okay, And there's changes, there's slight changes, so you don't necessarily see it all the same. There are definitely changes. However, we leave an imprint, and that imprint causes a new perception, which again leaves an imprint, causes a new perception. So there's a continuity of, although no external existence, but inseparably existing objects, existing inseparably from the mind, due to the ripening of an imprint, the appearance of an object, and the mind perceiving it. Therefore, the object and the mind have to exist at the same time, okay? Which is different to other philosophical schools, Prasangika, Sautantrika, all those who assert that they're external phenomena. They say the object has to exist at least a moment before the mind. Of course, before you can perceive a table, for instance, there must be a table, because it takes some time for whatever is in front of you to be reflected in your retina, and then for the brain, all the processes taking place. That is according to external existence, the way we know it from science, etc. The Chittamatra school would say, no, it just appears that way. There is no object over there, and then reflections in the retina and so forth. That's just an illusion. In actuality, there's the ripening of an imprint, and the moment that imprint ripens, you perceive the table, and you have the appearance of a table to a consciousness perceiving the table. So they arise at the same time. There's a mind perceiving the table, then the table exists, and when there's no longer the mind perceiving it, there's also no longer that particular table. So they exist and arise at the same time. Okay. All right, and then of course impermanent phenomena, as they're explained in verse 47, they have certain characteristics, 3 of them mentioned here, being the cause of everything that is imputed, of all imputed natures, whether existent or not. You always need an impermanent phenomena as a basis, and then the other 3 that I just explained here. Number 1, they exist in the absence of something external, that actually exists intrinsically, truly, and it's beyond the realm of concepts that don't just exist in the face of just concepts. They have an ultimate existence. They're just more real, if you like. Okay, that is just a summary of the Chittamatra school view, and now that is refuted. That is refuted with the following verses. Now, Chantakiti is saying, no, that's not the case. So why? Nagarjuna doesn't refute the Chittamatra school. He doesn't even mention them. So this is where this text, Entry into the Middle Way, which sometimes the title is also translated as supplement to the Middle Way. Here, when we say entry into the middle way or supplement to the middle way, I said that many, many lessons ago, the middle way here refers to the text middle way. What is the text middle way? Nagarjuna's fundamental wisdom is also described as the text middle way, or Madhyamika, the Mula Madhyamika Karika, right? So the text on the middle way. This text, entry into the middle way, or as it's also sometimes called supplement to the middle way, supplements Nagarjuna's text. Nagarjuna never talks of the Chittamatra school or the Svatantrika school, only Prasangika. But it's by refuting the Chittamatra system, the Chittamatra school, that we understand the Prasangika school better. So therefore, Chandakirti, on top of explaining the middle way, that is here in this case, Nagarjuna's text, the fundamental wisdom, or the middle way text, that is the Mula Madhyamika Karika, on top of explaining what it means, it supplements it. It gives other explanations that Chandakirti found to be helpful in order to get a better understanding of what Nagarjuna is talking about. So what does he add? He refutes the Chittamatra school, first explaining it, then refuting it, so for a better understanding. And he now asks the Chittamatra, the Prasangika school now, Chandakirti asked the Chittamatra school, what is your analogy? What analogy do you give for saying phenomena don't exist externally. And he says, like in a dream. He gives the analogy of a dream. Okay, so here it says in verse 47, no, 48, sorry, I get confused with the numbering. Where's your analogy for this mind with no external reality? If you Chittamatra say, like a dream, for example, let's examine this. Since such a mind, a dream mind, does not exist for me even in a dream, this analogy of yours has no validity. Okay, so the Chandrakirti says, such a mind doesn't exist inherently for me, not even in a dream. So actually, if you notice, remember I said that early on, or in one of the earlier classes, I said the Vaibhashika and the Sautrantika, they say, oh, objective existence exists out there. There's an objective world. They very much emphasize this in their philosophy. And then the Chittamatra comes along and says, well, wait a minute. These external phenomena, when you analyze them, you end up, like the way it appears to us, there are all these particles, these subtle building blocks of this world, and there's no essence to be found. Okay, similar to the Madhyamika school, they also say there's nothing to be found. If you just take these external particles, if you start with that, like the quantum physicians, they would, quantum physics, yeah, like in quantum physics, when you talk about, when you take things apart, well, you don't really find a root particle or what have you, just some essence. And because they don't find anything, followers of the Chittamatra school would conclude there's no external existence. Now, if there's nothing external, the external reality is gone, but reality must be there. They make the mind more real and more concrete than it actually is. So the mind takes on such a role. And this is where the debate starts between Chittamatra and Prasangika. They both deny something. The Chittamatra denies external existence, and the Prasangika says, well, I deny inherent external existence. Okay. But then what the Chittamatra very much establishes is the mind exists truly. The mind is so solid, because if you have no external existence, you have to make the mind more solid. And that's what the Prasangika school denies. They say, I don't believe the mind exists even in a dream. If that's your example, what is your proof for saying the mind exists inherently? This analogy of yours has no validity. And if you say the mind must exist inherently because we remember our dream when we wake up, well, the same must be true of external objects. We remember external objects when we wake up. Does that mean they exist? They exist truly? Well, according to you, they don't exist at all. Right? Now, we need to leave it here. I'm already a little bit too late. I mean, a little bit gone beyond time. So anyway, this much just on the Chittamatra school. Of course, it's not easy, and that's the thing. The text doesn't get easier. You just get more used to these ideas, and hopefully in that way it gets easier. So what I would like to do with you, as we did last time, to become more familiar with the idea of the Chittamatra school, to internalize them through an analytical meditation, and try to see the world through the glasses of the Chittamatra view, in order just to make our mind more flexible. All right, we know that eventually it we'll refute these ideas, we'll deny these ideas, but it serves a function to make our mind more flexible, to put the idea of subjective existence, lack of objective existence, make it more part of our own life. The importance of the mind becomes more obvious. All right, let's do the meditation. I don't know, I've got this weird thing popping up like a little window. Never mind, I'll just ignore it. Can you still hear and see me? Okay, great. Now let's start the last part of this session, which is the analytical meditation. We'll start as usual with some breathing. Just to calm the mind, to let go of any disruptive thoughts. please mute, if you haven't done so yet, I can hear some sounds. Please mute your speaker. Please mute yourself. And so now we'll turn into a Chittamatra Pasan. We see the world through the eyes of the mind-only philosophy. Although there are visual objects, there are sounds, smells, tastes, and tangible objects, they do not exist externally. They're mere appearances to your mind. Due to the ripening of imprints. Even your body does not exist externally. So whether it's too big, too small, or whatever else is wrong with its shape or color according to you, well, it's merely appearing to the mind. There's no external existence. The same is also true for other things around us that annoy us. That we believe to be objectively ugly. Objectively desirable. They appear to us in that way due to the ripening of imprints. without having any external appearance, external existence. So our reality is only a reflection of our own mind. And the analogy for that is a dream. Just as in a dream, there's no external sound or sight. There are no external sense objects, but mere appearances to the mind. Similarly, when we're awake, there are no external objects. Therefore, it becomes so much more important to pay attention to our mind. To pay attention to the imprints our tendencies, our habits, accounting for the way we perceive this world. This shows us that of the two, physical and emotional hygiene, as his homeless likes to call it, emotional hygiene is far more important. Since although, of according to the highest philosophical school, external phenomena do exist. They do not exist as separate from our mind as we may think. For our reality is a reflection of our own mind. And now let's conclude this analysis by focusing for a few moments on whichever conclusion we've come to. In particular with regard to how this can be relevant to our own life. And let's now dedicate whatever virtue we've accumulated making our mind more flexible through learning about the Chittamatra school. May this, of course, become a cause for our own enlightenment, for the welfare of all sentient beings. But also in the meantime, help us to integrate these ideas into our daily life. So that they may positively affect our interaction with others. And thus affect the environment, people around us, in a helpful way. Of course, may directly or indirectly benefit those who are sick, like Tali Lubin, those who are fearful, and so forth, the way described in Shantideva's prayer. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, attain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May there be time. May the poor find wealth. Those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. Okay, great, wonderful. So, well, just to remind you of your weekly homework, if you like. Of course, your interactions with other people, very important, the way described early on. Put the focus on other-centeredness rather than self-centeredness in the sense of exchanging yourself with others. Plus, if you can, of course, also integrate these ideas of, well, mind is at the forefront. If you like to think like the Chittamatra school, there's really nothing there. Knowing in the back of your mind that's not true, but just playing around with it. Similar to Tonglen, when you visualize, you take the suffering of all sentient beings, knowing that's not realistic. Still play with these ideas and see whether it can affect your mind, as in like putting the mind more into the center, your own mind, putting it more into the center, making mindfulness more of an issue, becoming more important. Okay, great. That's it for this time. I wish you a lovely week, nice week, and I see you again next Sunday. Okay, shalom. All right. Okay, goodbye. Good night.
Bye. Thank you.
Tschüss. Laila Tov.
Laila to.
Thank you. Thank you, Dharma friends.